Story 1. It feels like sometimes the world has become louder. With everything moving so fast and everyone online, we may have gotten a bit lost in our own corners. But I still see good people helping each other every day. Perhaps kindness is still present, just quieter at times. Story 2. Sometime after the growth of agriculture. I am personally not a fan of golden age tropes. Life was much harder in the past, and the idea of community was never straightforward. When was society ever kind? And which society are we discussing anyway? Story 3. We used to live in communities where everyone relied on each other for survival and daily life. However, when the Industrial Revolution began, everything changed. People moved to cities, factories became the heart of economies, and success became about standing out as individuals. Over time, advertisements, media, and social media taught us that it's all about ourselves, our brands, our successes, our images. We stopped looking out for one another and started focusing on advancing on our own. Story 4. Man is a social animal and prefers small groups. When groups become too large, individuals tend to focus more on themselves due to competition with others. Story 5. Most people tend to care primarily for their social circle and immediate community. As cities and societies grew larger, this became increasingly apparent. Story 6. Many responses on social media come from Reddit, which tends to attract a younger audience. The answer is Reagan. We may not have recognized it until the advent of smartphones, social media, and the Make America Great Again movement, but it began when corporate America and conservative think tanks successfully got their spokesperson elected as president. Story 7. Kind and community-focused? When exactly was this? Point to one human society that ever lived up to this ideal. This rose-tinted view of history is baffling to me. Story 8. Around the time grind culture became inspirational and we started referring to basic decency as emotional labor, flexing online became more prominent than helping others offline, causing kindness to take a back seat to social status. Story 9. It never shifted. There are many people doing various things independently. This may surprise those who are always online, but most people, including you, follow their community's rules mostly without thinking. Society is still generally well-ordered and not a chaotic environment. For now. Story 10. It was never kind, but it was community-focused. The good old days of communal living had many downsides, including abuse and sexism. These issues are less tolerated today. Story 11. What's hilarious is this post was right under a post depicting a medieval torture device. The Iron Bull. A person is placed inside an iron bull. A fire is lit underneath, and they burn or steam to death while steam shoots out of the bull's nostrils. Story 12. We were never kind. You are idealizing community focus. I am sure it was much worse than individualism, with everyone interfering in your life. Story 13. My theory is that it has always been like this, and the internet and social media have only brought awareness to it. Story 14. If you look at history, you can see that both kindness and self-interest occur frequently. Truth be told, as a species, we can and often do embody both within the same lifespan. I am sure that in your life you have experienced being kind and community-focused, while also having times when you prioritize yourself. I strive to be as respectful and civil as possible, believing that communication is vital. I want to help others in any way I can, but I also recognize the importance of self-care, especially since not everyone will support me. Additionally, there are individuals I know I cannot assist, and there are limits to how much kindness I can offer. Some people are so vitriolic and hateful that kindness may be lost on them, as even a simple act of kindness can be misinterpreted as an attack. Story 15. In some ways, it was never solely about everyone working together for the greater good. There have always been leaders and the issues that come with that. Women have taken on the bulk of the work at home while men went off to hunt, drink, or trade. We came close to having each person contribute their unique skills, but we just didn't quite make it. Hopefully, we can resolve that soon. Story 16. When were we ever kind and community-focused? In the past, slavery was accepted, women could not vote, members of the LGBTQ+ community were persecuted, and countless lives were lost during 2 world wars. Story 17. How kind was it that not long ago, the law segregated people just for being the wrong color? How kind was it that not long ago, approximately half the country couldn't legally vote because of their anatomy? And forget completely about transgender individuals. How kind was it that people like Alan Turing had to suffer just because they loved others of the same sex? Story 18. Protestantism eroded the more collectivist aspects of Western society in favor of individualism. The advancement of capitalism and atheism inspired the hyper-individualism we see today. Story 19. Few thousand years ago, at least, humans have always been unkind to one another. We are currently living in the most compassionate period in history. Story 20. Were we ever truly kind and community-focused as a whole? There have always been terrible things in the world. Adjacent to that, there has always been beauty. What has changed is that we have become more consumed with the idea that we need to grapple with all these terrible things all the time, because failing to do so would mean burying our heads in the sand and standing by while evil triumphs. Story 21. Centralized responsibility for care is delegated to governments, creating a disconnect between individuals and their involvement through layers of abstraction. If I surveyed people expressing concerns about cuts to the local food bank and asked if they had voluntarily engaged in any community service in the last year, few would respond affirmatively. They believe someone else handles the work. Story 22. I don't think it's a societal issue. I believe it's a matter of age. Many of us were raised on the values of caring, sharing, and helping. However, as soon as we become adults, we realize that those values often contradict the harsh reality that to succeed, we may need to step on others. Story 23. When were we ever kind and community-focused? Let me know when that was a thing, and then I will try to answer your question. Story 24. I think it is a fair statement that a considerable number of communities would be looking around somewhat confused about when and where this type of community-driven ideal you speak of existed. Story 25. When community became content and kindness became currency, we stopped being neighbors and started being brands. Story 26. When the self-facing camera emerged, we did not view everything through our own lens prior to social media and the front camera. Story 27. Boomers' parents fought to improve society and enhance their children's lives. They had children, and the grandparents assisted with care. Now, boomers seem to prioritize their own interests, offering little help with their grandchildren and wanting everything for themselves. This generation is often viewed as the most self-centered. Story 28. We were always individualistic. If you did not put yourself first, you would face significant challenges in continuing your lineage. Story 29. Decades ago, there was little to do at home. Children and families experienced boredom indoors, prompting everyone to go outside to meet new people and engage in enjoyable activities together. Now, with thousands of television channels and the internet, there is an abundance of entertainment options at home, so people generally do not get bored anymore. This has diminished the need for many to leave their houses. In my humble opinion, texting has contributed to a fear of direct communication, with individuals hesitant to speak on the phone. This situation was significantly worsened in 2020 by government lockdown measures that restricted social interaction and required people to stay home. Story 30. In Canada, 1988, American media, particularly cable television, became very mainstream and affordable for everyone. I noticed a distinctive shift in people in 1994, 6 years after cable television became standard everywhere and following the 1988 Olympics, which had the largest volunteer base ever. Story 31. One thing I don't see discussed is the culture fostered by media. The early 1900s culture was more community-oriented. Groups like the Rotary Club were developed as a way for business people to come together and support their community. In the 1970s, Milton Friedman stated that corporations should only exist for profit. This normalized the idea that greed is good, which creates a zero-sum world. This mindset breaks down social cohesion and makes people less kind, as evidenced by the Robbers Cave experiment. Consider that the United States was becoming more urbanized, leading to increased contact with strangers. We owe nothing to strangers, and in a competitive environment, they can be perceived as a threat to our personal economic prosperity. As a result, we had a world that was becoming less personally connected, along with an economic viewpoint that was increasingly hostile toward one another. Then, during the pandemic, some segments of the United States believed it was a hoax and refused to perform the basic human kindness of wearing masks around others. I believe the pandemic was the last straw that broke the camel's back. Story 32. Well, society was never kind. People look upon the past with nostalgia. Yes, there was more contact among individuals, but that included dysfunctional and abusive relationships with many problems kept behind closed doors. Regarding the shift to individualism, I've met many older immigrants who moved to the United States, a famously individualistic country, and say they are much happier here, despite cultural and language barriers and having all their family abroad. On the other hand, other immigrants from their generation miss home, even though there is often a gap in quality of life. Why? For the first group, it's because they enjoy living in the United States without ever having to talk to or know their neighbors. They appreciate being able to communicate only with their immediate family and a few close friends when they wish. They love that they are not responsible for anyone except their immediate family. They complain about how, whenever they go home, everyone wants to stop by, chat, and bring gifts of food they don't want. Many of their home countries now have excellent transportation systems, but they prefer to stay in their American suburbs because they do not want to share a space with others or be forced to make stops they don't want to. They could easily retire in their home countries with their savings, but they believe that privacy and a lack of connectivity are worth paying for. The latter group prioritizes community ties. What the former group finds liberating about the United States, the latter finds alienating and soulless. This illustrates the appeal of individualism. You can do whatever you want whenever you want. If you are financially stable, it becomes much more feasible. In the past, you needed to maintain good relationships with your neighbors and extended family in case you needed something. However, if you are financially stable, you can pay for babysitters, construction help, and grocery deliveries when you are short on supplies. In the process, you are paying not just for goods or services, but also for distance from others. You don't have to entertain your harmless, loving, but somewhat annoying relative. You can simply get what you need, even if it means losing that connection. If so many individuals who were not even raised here can fall in love with these norms, imagine someone who was born and raised in this hyper-individualistic community. They find it especially hard to give up the perks, particularly the lack of responsibility, even if they recognize the benefits of maintaining a community. It is challenging to convince them to keep relationships that are not perfect in their eyes. If everyone thinks this way, then loneliness prevails. There is a saying, annoyance is a small price to pay for community. Of course, there is a middle ground. It is healthy, for example, to end unhealthy relationships with people who disregard your boundaries. However, the truth is that most relationships are not perfect, even if they are ultimately rewarding. We've all had friendships where a friend does something that annoys us, even though we love them otherwise. Many issues can be resolved with communication. If someone believes in cutting off everyone who is even slightly toxic, then they are likely to be very lonely. Story 33. I love that the post just above this in my feed showed many people running to a car that was on fire, using tools, fire extinguishers, and their bare hands to try to pull the driver out. Day to day, there may be less community, but community is there for us in an emergency. Story 34. Industrialization, cities, and a gradual encroachment of the concept of individualism have been significant. Margaret Thatcher's famous quote summed it up. There is no such thing as society, only the individual and families. This shift has become increasingly noticeable throughout my lifetime. Story 35. Historical materialism frames it as the rise of power structures that created different classes. We are still fighting a class war today. Story 36. There are many issues in a society that promotes individualism and rampant capitalism, often prioritizing personal wealth above all else. Massive urbanization has led to people living in densely populated areas with many strangers, resulting in increased isolation. Individuals can now ignore those around them without facing consequences, as communication is no longer necessary for shopping, accessing news, or seeking entertainment. Story 37. The thing is, they don't care about me and my people, so I just match energy. One guy, about 10 years ago, made it acceptable to hate and create fear while also promoting false propaganda and shouting fake news. It's pretty wild. Story 38. Capitalism compels us to compete for limited resources, choosing competition over cooperation. Even though cooperation yields better results and is more sustainable, it conditions us to act unethically and rewards us for doing so. The laws governing corporations state that those in charge are legally required to prioritize profit above all else. If an action causes harm to a community, the law is indifferent. Corporations can compensate victims as long as profits remain high and no one faces criminal consequences. The same applies to environmental destruction. The law shows little concern. It effectively compels individuals to engage in harmful practices towards each other and the planet in pursuit of wealth. I realized this during law school and quickly became disenchanted with capitalism. Story 39. The side effect of $80 trillion flowing into the bank accounts of the wealthy is evident. One should examine the behavior associated with resource scarcity. When times become difficult, whether due to natural causes or artificial manipulation, we tend to behave similarly to other animals. Story 40. People have always been selfish. However, as technology improves, we need people less to achieve our desires. Independence can harm relationships, while interdependence promotes them. Story 41. Social media's algorithmic amplification plays a significant role. It benefits media companies because it keeps us in front of the content we want to see. However, it creates a false sense of reality. It places everyone in their own echo chamber, surrounded by people who think the same way, regardless of whether it is right or wrong. This leads to constant, over-amplified confirmation. Suddenly, the internet becomes a safe space for reassurance from like-minded individuals while launching verbal attacks at those who disagree. Meanwhile, we are becoming incompatible with reality, surrounded by people with different beliefs, and we ourselves are frequently incorrect. We struggle to navigate this situation since the internet has latched onto our belief system and reinforced it. Story 42. It has always been this way. Social media now highlights it more prominently. Most people are insincere. Research Seattle Freeze for more insights. Many social interactions, such as coffee invitations, can often be insincere. Additionally, a significant portion of the global population contributes to animal cruelty. Since many do not see an issue with it, there is little incentive for change. Most individuals want to feel and be perceived as ethical. If a large percentage of people consider these actions acceptable, they may believe it is not unethical, or they may know it is unethical but choose not to care because there are no social repercussions. Racism is not universally accepted. It tends to be hidden rather than openly expressed. Consumption of dogs and cats is not universally accepted, only in certain regions, leading many to consider it unethical and advocate for its cessation, similar to the stance on child marriage. Story 43. The moment anyone with a camera could share their thoughts with the world. Story 44. In hindsight, I would argue that the UK government in the 1980s sold off utilities and undermined the miners' unions, which had a significant effect on society. Neighbors fell out with each other, and families became estranged. The prevailing feeling was that money was king, and people believed they could do anything if they had enough. It became every person for themselves, and individuals stopped checking on their neighbors because they didn't know them. Community spirit and civic pride seemed to vanish. Story 45. As survival became easier, we had to rely less on our communities. The invention of capitalism certainly didn't help. Story 46. Voting for the Republican Party in the United States is a vote for individual interests. Republicans show little regard for the common good. Story 47. There are too many people in this world competing for an increasingly limited supply of resources. Naturally, people will compete with and turn on each other, some for the sheer entertainment value of preying on their fellow humans because they know no better. Story 48. Population increases and the community is pitted against other communities. Red hats versus rainbows. Story 49. It happened with the gradual loss of actual communities. Cars replacing public transit means you aren't spending time around other people in your area. Having television to watch all day means you aren't hanging out at the park with your neighbors. Zoning laws have virtually made third places, locations other than home and work for relaxation and socializing, like a local pub, illegal. Put these together, and you become extremely isolated from even your next-door neighbors, losing your in-real-life community. Story 50. Internet, cell phones, and social media have changed the way we connect, but you can still find pockets of community depending on where you live. I live in a wonderful neighborhood where people come together regularly. Our children play together, and we host barbecues and parties while enjoying the holidays as a group. We lend equipment and vehicles to one another, and it's a fantastic experience. Story 51. Honestly, I think a lot of it comes down to social media completely deteriorating the way we interact. It's not just that people are more selfish now. It's that if you don't hold exactly the right opinion, even if you're 95% in agreement but 5% questioning something, you're treated poorly. You're screamed at, insulted, and called every name imaginable. And it's not just fringe individuals doing it. It's normal people, neighbors, friends, and family. Entitlement has exploded too. Somewhere along the line, community stopped meaning giving and started meaning everyone owes me. People act like they're entitled to your care, your energy, your help, and your sympathy. If you don't give it exactly how they want it, or fast enough, or without asking questions, then you're suddenly a monster. I used to genuinely care about a lot of different groups. I really did. But over time, many of those same groups treated me poorly for not agreeing with everything perfectly, so I just stopped. Why would I keep caring about people who show me nothing but hatred because I think slightly differently? And yes, I absolutely blame social media. The automated accounts, the algorithms, the endless outrage loops. It's affecting all of us, not just others. It's amplifying issues we might have had small human arguments about into these massive relationship-ending battles. It's pushing us to become obsessed with causes and identities in ways that just weren't happening before. The lockdown didn't help either. Killed a lot of human connection. It trapped us behind screens, cut off from body language, eye contact, and real conversations. We got used to seeing people as text boxes and profile pictures instead of human beings, making it much easier to be cruel. It's not just one thing, but rather a whole storm of issues. But yes, social media ignited the fire. Story 52. Started mainly in the late 1970s and was mostly complete by the early 2000s. Efforts to rebuild have faced many barriers, with one of the biggest being the arrival of smartphones and social media. Story 53. It depends on where you are in society. There are still many places in the world that emphasize caring for others as a community. However, they tend to be smaller and quieter areas that do not draw much attention to themselves. It is in the big, crowded areas where this sense of community begins to diminish. Story 54. I'm not sure. Maybe when more people began hiding behind computer screens and let go of their filters. It seems to have led to individuals falling into rabbit holes and becoming isolated in echo chambers where they hear others supporting their negative thoughts, and that becomes their reality. Just a thought. Story 55. When COVID-19 emerged, it divided us into ideological camps. If you tell people that you want them to suffer because they choose not to get vaccinated, they will stop caring about you. Story 56. I am increasingly convinced that it was sometime after the Enlightenment era in the 19th century when we transitioned to neoliberalism. There are several compelling articles and video essays on the topic. Story 57. I just heard a piece on National Public Radio about this. They said it's phones. People are meeting the majority of their needs through phones, which makes more people narcissistic. Story 58. Job markets are tightening, with more people being highly qualified. Jobs are being consolidated, resulting in one person doing the work that previously required 3 to 4 individuals. Story 59. I began to notice it around the dawn of social media and reality entertainment television. However, it must have been before that, as these things emerged with the significant shift in society. I also agree with others who say, we have always been this way, or it's not different now, the differences just became more pronounced. With society as it is, kindness and a focus on community must become much more conscious and intentional to be noticeable. Story 60. since those in power recognized how easy it was to have everyone live in fear and blame the less fortunate instead of poor leadership. Story 61. When widespread internet access became available, it changed how people interacted. Before this, if someone was unpleasant, their behavior was limited to those they could physically interact with. Afterward, it became easy to connect with many others worldwide who shared similar thoughts and beliefs, leading to feelings of validation and encouragement. This was true before the advent of smartphones and social media, which further amplified these dynamics to what we experience today. Story 62. In the 1980s, it began to slip away. Correcting bad behavior in children transformed into a not my child attitude, and kids were treated as if they were merely small adults. Story 63. Baby boomers grew up with abundance in various aspects of life. There were enough jobs, houses, and money for groceries, allowing them the time and resources to give back. Now, wealth has concentrated at the top, and that abundance has diminished. More people are struggling, prompting them to prioritize their own needs. Edit. Does this community not understand the concept of income inequality? Story 64. That was the 1980s. Consumerism and self-gratification were all the rage. Now those individuals are older, still only care about themselves, and have taught this behavior to their children. Story 65. Anonymity, negative news, lack of confidence in oneself and in government, temporary isolation, and fear-mongering during COVID-19 contributed to feelings of despair. The sudden exposure of misfortune and corruption in the world affected many individuals. The need for approval or attention often leads to negative behaviors receiving more focus. Kindness is a strength. When people have weak hearts, they may become cold and unkind. Story 66. Whenever the modern culture of frivolous lawsuits became prevalent, around the 1970s or so, it became a baseline for our everyday lives by the 2000s. You can get sued for anything. Everything is a liability. How can you have a community if you can't trust that Dave knows not to drink the motor oil you sold him? Story 67. Overpopulation contributed to this, as did capitalism. Overpopulation makes us feel less compassionate towards others, as we see many people and lose the sense that they are all individuals. In small communities, people still greet strangers, whereas those in large cities often avoid even making eye contact. A study known as Universe 25 demonstrated how a growing population of rats and mice led to decreased care for one another and even reduced concern for their own offspring. Capitalism also fosters a competitive mindset that often diminishes our capacity to care for others. Story 68. When the population exploded and resources became harder to obtain, in our case as a society, resources refer to money. Story 69. It's largely about the rise of main character syndrome becoming popular with social media and a lack of empathy and understanding, while cruel acts are often rewarded with further encouragement. Just like the bean soup incident on TikTok, many people do not want to make the effort to understand something that does not relate directly to them. As a result, people often do not want to understand or empathize with marginalized groups seeking change, accessibility, and legal protections. They may not see the struggles that these groups face daily, as many circumstances are beyond their control. For instance, individuals with disabilities may face challenges related to non-visible medical issues. Many able-bodied people do not consider how difficult it is for someone using a wheelchair to navigate car-heavy cities or to find accessible parking. Story 70. When I get in trouble for telling a friend he is gaining weight, it feels like body shaming. Or when I tell someone they are ridiculous for thinking they are a dog, I realize I do not want to improve the lives of people who are easily offended. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.